Hi. So we are going to talk about the equations and graphs of circles in this lesson. So if you remember in algebra, and we've reviewed it in here, there was the standard form of an equation, and there was the slope-intercept form of the equation, and that was when you had a straight line. Well, you have the standard form for the equation of a circle as well. And in the standard form of the equation, you see some things. This is the standard form. You're going to want to know this through this whole lesson. So it's x minus h quantity squared, y minus k quantity squared, and r squared. It is important to note that this minus sign is part of this equation. It has to be there. It's kind of like when we had the formula for the slope of a line, and the minus sign was part of the equation. So we're going to look at a couple of instances and show you why that's important. But let's talk about what's in the equation. Well, what do you think the r means? R is the radius, and you have 2 points in there. So the center of a circle is at HK. That's just a point. It's an x, y coordinate, and it's the specific coordinates for the center. So you can see the center of the circle immediately in the standard form of the equation of a circle. You can see it right off at HK. So if I were to give you an equation of a circle, and maybe it is x minus 4 quantity squared, so I'm just going to do that for this one, now that you know that that means squared, y minus 4 quantity squared equals 2 quantity squared. So your center is at 4, 4, and the radius is 2, because it's r squared, which is 2 squared. So here's my h, k, and r. H, K, R. You have to know that HK is the center. That's a new term in this one. If I wanted to graph this circle now on the coordinate plane, I know exactly where the center is. The center is at 4, 4. So I would go over 4 and up 4. So at 4, 4, I'll make a point for the center of my circle. And I know that the radius is 2. So there's an edge of my circle here. There's an edge of point here because the radius is 2. One there, and there's one there. That's 4 points on my circle. And then you can sketch in freehand the rest of it like so. So that's how you graph a circle. And sometimes on this, I can actually get a circle drawn. Look there. Got it. So there's a circle, and we've graphed it. Now, how did I get those 4 points on the circle? I got those because I knew the radius was 2. And so all I had to do was come out 2 spots to the left of the center because it was an exact point. 2 to the right, 2 up, and I went 2 down. That gave me 4 points. Now also this is 2, this is 2, and this is 2, but those points aren't going to help me because I didn't have a ruler in my hand and I can't tell you exactly 2 over. But I could get those 4 points exactly because the radius is 2, which is right in my equation. All right. That circle was centered at HK, which is 4, 4, because H was 4 and Y was 4. And the radius was 2. Now, sometimes you'll be given the equation of a circle in a little bit different format. Sometimes you might have something like this. So we have x minus 2 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 9. Well, you're going to have to know that 9 is the radius squared. Since I didn't write it in this format, right here, in an R squared format, you're going to have to figure that out. Well, 9 is 3 squared. So then the radius must equal 3. So we were going to graph this one. We would go to our center point and make a dot. So the center is at HK. See if you can figure out the center. Figure out the H and the K. The center is at positive 2, positive 3. There's my center. The radius is 3, so we're going to go over to the right 3. We're going to go to the left 3. We're going to go down 3. And we're going to go up 3. And there's our circle. And then all we need to do is take a pencil and kind of sketch that in. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but that is the graph of that circle. All you need is the center and the radius, and you can figure any of these circles out. Now let's look at a different one. So let's take these off the screen. Okay. Click that dot. There we go. What if I'm given this equation? X plus 1 quantity squared, and I'm going to come back and put that in because I want it to be exactly clear what I'm doing here. Y minus 2 quantity squared equals, I'm going to say 16. So it's quantity squared and quantity squared. First, ask yourself, what's the radius? Well, to get the radius, you're going to have to take the square root of 16. You can use your calculator for that. Or root 16. The square root of 16 is 4. It's actually plus or minus 4, but we can't have a minus radius. So this is 4 quantity squared if you wanted to write it in standard form. Now the h and the k, if you notice in our formula, and I specifically pointed this out to you, that minus in the formula is part of it. It must be there. I don't have a minus. I have a plus. That means you have to adjust something. If you were going to, how do you get a plus sign out of negative? So ask yourself to think backward. In addition and subtraction with positive and negative numbers, when you have x minus negative 1, isn't that the same as positive 1? And if you said yes, you would be right because it is. And that's exactly what we have there. So when you have a plus sign in this equation of a circle, you're going to have to change that to say minus negative, because the minus sign is part of that formula. You cannot use it unless you have that minus sign there, just like up here. Now you can see what h is. So what is your h and your k? What is the center of the circle? It's -1, 2. When you have a negative coordinate on the center of your circle, and you simplify the equation for the circle, it shows up as a plus sign. You have got to understand that, because you don't want to miss the ones that have a second, third, or fourth quadrant center. So a -1 is going to look like +1 in the standard form of your equation. Do not forget that. Pencil that one in. So we've got the center of our circle now is at -1, +2. Our radius is 4. So we go up 4, over 4, and there's your circle. Pencil that in, and I just kind of guessed on that circle, hoping for the best. And there's you a circle centered at -1, -2 with a radius of 4, right? The only tricky thing about the standard form of the equation of a circle is when you have a plus sign in there, because that negative is part of the equation. Now the flip side of this is you're going to have the graph of a circle, and you're going to be asked to come up with the equation of said circle. So if I put a circle on this graph, let's add as a point, because that one's kind of over just a little bit. Now, where is the center? Well, it's hard to tell on my homemade graph, but the center is going to be right there. And the radius is 1, 2, 3, 4. Radius 1, 2, 3, 4. Now come up with the equation of that. So you know the radius equals 4. And you know your center, your HK, is at 0, 0, because it's centered at the origin. Now what's our equation? So our equation, pause and see if you can come up with this on your own. X minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals 4 quantity squared. Now let's simplify it a little bit. We don't put x minus 0. So we actually have x squared plus y squared equals 16. So you see how the 0 falls out when your vertex is at the center. Okay? Don't miss that one. Now, another thing that you might end up with is you might not be given a graph. You might simply be given a picture. So we're given a circle. We're given the radius of the circle. Actually, we're trying to find the radius. What if this is 4 and this is 3? What's the radius of the circle? Can't count units. We don't have a graph. Hopefully you recognize that this is a Pythagorean triplet. We studied those. You already know that the radius has to be 5. However, if you forget that, r squared equals 4 squared plus 3 squared. Use your Pythagorean theorem, and you can figure that out quite easily, right? Now, another thing that you're going to run into, and we're going to have to bring in review of the distance formula. Hopefully you remember the distance formula, and it says distance equals the square root of all this. So x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. So let me finish it all up first. Let's get this in here. Excuse me. X2 minus x1, y2 minus y1. And remember, that's kind of from slope. You're supposed to label the points, figure out a number 1 and a number 2. And this is quantity squared, so we'll put our exponent in. And it's the square root of this whole big piece. Square root of all of that. That's your distance formula. You need to know that. You need to know it forever in math. You're going to have to use the distance formula sometimes to find the radius. Now, what if you're just given 2 points? This is what we're given. Find the center and radius of a circle that has a diameter with endpoint -4, 4, and 12, -8. So we have a radius, a diameter that goes from -4, to 12, -8. We're also going to have to throw in, with this one, the formula for the midpoint of a segment. We have not covered this in geometry yet. It has been since Algebra 1 that you covered this. But we do know that the diameter is twice the radius. So if I was just going to graph this point, 12, -8, and -4, 4, that is all the way across the circle. And it doesn't go straight. It is over and 8 down. So if I were to graph these points, I would be looking something like this. 12 over and 8 down. And then 4 and 4. This would be what my circle is. There is no way for me to look at that and count squares to figure out the length of that diameter. But this is my circle. This is a big, huge circle. Because that diameter goes right across the middle of the circle. That's my circle. What I need to know is the radius. There is absolutely no way to look at this and count and figure out exactly what point is at the center of the circle. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to take this segment, the diameter of which they gave you the two endpoints, -4, 4, and 12, -8, and figure out the midpoint to get your center. So let's do that. Let's review the midpoint formula. Now the midpoint formula is kind of confusing because it's two things. Ask yourself the midpoint between these, what is it exactly? The midpoint has an X and a Y. It is a point. Therefore, you have two pieces to this formula. First, you find the X, and then you find the Y. Well, if you just remember that, the midpoint formula is easy. How do you find the middle of something? Add it up and divide it by 2. So the midpoint X part, the X equals X1 plus X2 divided by 2. And the Y of your middle point is Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. Now it's easy if you just plug those in. So we're going to make this be point number 1 and this be point number 2. So for our middle point, the one that's right smack in the middle of those 2 points, we're going to add up our x's and divide by 2. So for this one, it's -4 plus 12 divided by 2. Well, that's 8 divided by 2. And you put that whole fraction in your calculator and come up with 4. Put it in just like that. -4 plus 2 divided by 2. Do not try to do this in your head. So let's just do it. -4 plus 12 divided by 2. You have a fraction. On top, you have negative. You can't use the minus sign. 4 plus 12. On the bottom, you have 2. There's your answer, 4. There's no need for you to do that math in your head. You're going to mess up a negative or something, and it will cause you to miss the whole problem, and then it's just going to waste time. So put that into your calculator. The other one is your y1 plus y2 over 2. So you have 4 plus -8. All of that divided by 2. When you put that in your calculator, you're going to get -2 for your y. That tells you that the very center of the circle, because it's the midpoint of the diameter, the center is at 4, -2. That is your HK. We've got half of our formula right there. H is 4, K is -2. I would write these down in my notes to find the midpoint X and the midpoint Y. That is the X midpoint, not just any old random X, it's the midpoint coordinate. Okay, and the Y part of the midpoint. Keep in your notes straight that you're talking about the midpoint of any line segment. You're going to apply this again in Algebra 2. You learned it in Algebra 1, and we're going to use it some more in geometry. It's a new concept for this geometry class, but you did cover it in Algebra 1. Okay, so the midpoint. I knew the diameter. I had to find the exact center point of that diameter to get the center of my circle, because the midpoint is right in the middle of the diameter. Now I need to know the radius. Well, if you look at a circle, the radius there's my diameter. The very center of the diameter is what we just found. That's the midpoint of the diameter, also the center of the circle. What's the radius? The radius is the distance from the midpoint to the edge. So our radius is the distance between this point and the center. It's the distance between these 2 points. You can use the other one if you want. It'll be the same no matter what. I just picked one. Now we're going to use the distance formula to figure out this distance right here, the radius. It's the distance between that point and the center of our circle. Okay? So use the distance formula to figure out the length of your radius. I'm going to have to erase some of this stuff. Midpoint's got to go. You write that in your notes. And now let's figure out the radius of this circle. So we're going to have to pick one of these, and we're going to have to make it number 2 and make the other one be number 1. So I'm going to leave the 12, -8 as point number 2, and I'm going to use the other one as point number 1. I'm going to label it X2. That's the X coordinate of point number 2. This is just like we did when we did slope. X2 is 12. X1 is the X coordinate of point number 1. Y2 is the Y value of point number 2. Y1 is the Y value of point number 1. If you mark them 1 and 2 the opposite order, your points will just be different. You're still going to get it right. It's okay. You can make either one you want be number 1 and number 2, as long as you don't mix them, as long as you keep it right. So what we're going to end up with is the square root of 12 minus 4 quantity squared plus -8 minus -2 quantity squared. We're going to take those and we're going to plug it into our calculator exactly that way. So we are actually going to, let me put this over the top. Our X2 is 12. We're going to have 12 minus our X1. Our x1 is 4 minus 4. And then the other one, we're going to have negative 8 because that's what our y2 is. Negative 8, you can't drop off the negative, minus, what's our y1? Negative 2. Don't lose your negative sign. Negative 2. That's what we're going to put in our calculator. 12 minus 4, because that's x2 minus x1. Negative 8 minus negative 2, because the minus is part of the formula. You can't leave it out just because you have a negative 2. And we're going to put that whole piece in our calculator. I know you can't do all this in your head. I know minus negatives are intimidating, squares and square roots. You don't need to know how to do any of that anymore, because we're going to put it in our calculator exactly like you just wrote it. Let's go to our calculator. Clear everything off. The first thing we need in there is a square root symbol. So second root. In parentheses, we have that x2 minus x1. 12 minus 4. Whoops, the daisy. Not what I wanted. 4. That is squared. So up arrow 2. Directional pad to the right to get off of the exponent line, plus parentheses, negative 8 minus negative 2. Remember, you cannot use this button for a negative. You have to use the negative button. Parentheses, up arrow 2 to square it. Directional pad to the right to get out from under that root and hit enter. The distance between those points is 10. Your calculator did that for you. Your radius is 10. The distance between the point on the edge and the center is 10. So the radius equals 10. Now let's finish writing this equation. So we've got x minus, what is our h? 4 quantity squared plus y minus, look, our k is negative. Minus negative turns into plus positive, plus 2 quantity squared equals, our radius is 10, so we will put 10 squared, and you can also put 100 if you want, because 10 squared is 100. That is how you're going to get the equation of a circle when given 2 points on the circle that are the 2 end points of your diameter. That's hard. You've got to use the distance formula and the midpoint formula. Now let's look at a couple of the examples that you're going to do on your worksheet, because you may not need to use that distance formula to figure that out until your unit test. I would practice that and I would understand that, because you will have problems like that on your unit test. Okay, so couple. Okay, so the first group says write the equation. Center's at 3, the radius is at 16. Good idea on multiple choice to say, what is it not for sure? I'm going to mark some of these out, cross off a crazy answer. Well, the center's at 3, so it can't be that, it can't be that. The center is at positive 3, so is it B or D? Well, you have to have the minus in there, so it would be B. You don't even need to figure out what 16 squared is, okay? All right. There we go. Okay. Now, these other ones, same deal. Not too shabby. Now, circumference is 10 pi. Let's look at number 6. If the circumference is 10 pi, you're going to have to figure out the radius. Remember, circumference equals 2 times the radius times pi. Well, 10 pi equals 2 times the radius times pi. You're going to divide both sides of that equation by 2 pi, and you will get your radius. Put it in your calculator, 10 pi divided by 2 pi. Your pi's actually are going to cancel. These cancel and go away. Your 2's are going to cancel. So 5 is your radius. Easy peasy. Now it's just a matter of figuring out this 8 and negative 8. One is positive, one is negative. Which one is it? So the minus is part of the formula. There is your answer. The radius is 5 and they've squared it. Do you see how in your equation, just like we talked about, a negative will turn positive and the positive stays because the minus is part of the formula. That's what we talked about. All right. The ends of the diameter, you are going to use the distance to the midpoint formula. I'm sorry, forgot that was there. So these are just like that last one that we just did. Use the midpoint formula and the distance formula to figure out that radius. You can do those. There'll be 5 of them. Graphing the equation. So 16, where's the center? We did one exactly like that. So the center is at 0, 0. You can cross off some crazy answers. It is definitely not this one, not this one, and not this one. You don't even have to calculate the radius because you know there's only one of those at the origin. However, let's look at the radius. The radius is, this radius squared is 16, therefore the radius needs to be 4. Does this make sense? 2, 4. Yes, this is a circle with radius 4. Okay? Now the other one, square root of 46, that's not an even number. So your center probably is not on an even integer because you're going to have to take, your radius is not an even number. That's the radius squared. But again, we're at the origin. Let's look at where is the center and the radius, and sketch the graph. So you've got some choices. So this is a sketch and the center and the radius with some multiple choices that go with it. So number 22, the radius is clearly 4. Which one of these could it be? Let's cross a crazy answer off. Definitely not this one because the radius is 4. Positive 2 is our center. No, no, no. Got to be A. Okay. Now, number 26, 27, and to the end are a little more complex. So we're going to have to do what is known as completing the square. One second. Okay, as I study this worksheet a little bit, 26 through 30 is an Algebra 2 standard for completing the square. So on the key, I am going to put the give you some freebies on there. 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. Those are bonus points. They're not going to count against you. So see if you can figure them out with homework help. But basically, any answer choice you put in will be right because on the key, it will have them all. Okay? So 26 through 30, that's an Algebra 2 standard. You're not ready for that yet, so we're not going to cover it in that lesson. The last 5, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30, you just put any answer, they're all going to be right. So here's what you're going to do. Upload pictures of the notes. Upload your work shown. You're going to have a lot of algebra in this one to do with your distance and midpoint formulas and square roots and things like that. Draw the pictures, show the work, all of that. Use homework help, especially with that third group. You're probably going to need it with the distance and the midpoint formula. And at the very end, you put your multiple choice answers into the Google form for your final grade. Remember, the last 5, any answer you put is going to be correct. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next lesson.